Back in the early 1980s, when I first decided to become a more proficient fly angler, we had a fly called the 52 Buick. It was named such because of how viciously hard those strikes were. They would often almost rip the rod right out of your hands. I believe that fly was a vague imitation of the Damselfly nymph. It had the shape and color of one, and they were often most effective in early summer when damselflies were beginning to hatch. With the evolution of fly materials, we have tied much better representations. Today I want to show you one I call the Straggle damsel. Hello everybody, welcome to my fly bench. Today we're going to be tying the Straggle damsel. I first began to develop this fly back in the mid-1990s fishing Salmon Lake in the Douglas Lake Ranch country. Let's take a look at the materials we're going to need to tie this fly. So into my hook I've got my Togen's number 10 2x long curved nymph hook. To that I've attached my black 3/0 unithread. I'm using such a large thread because I want to build up a taper in here behind the bead chain eyes. And of course the bead chain eyes, which I've tied in there and added a drop of super glue to secure them into place. Damselflies have a prominent set of eyes. And the early 52 Buick, that was a successful fly in its day, didn't really have those features. They had some peacock curl up there to try to represent the head a little bit. But I believe the addition of peacock, or the bead chain eyes here, does a better representation of that feature and of the natural. And so what we're going to do here now is wrap in our tying thread and build up a bit of a taper. The natural damselfly has quite a long, slender taper, but it is significantly thicker, wider at the thorax and head area than the abdomen, and I wanted to represent that, so I'm using tying thread, a thick tying thread, to do that, and I find it works. And the addition of the straggle string later on in this area too will add to that widening of the fly. So now we'll take our whip finish tool and tie it off here behind the eyes, about 3 or 4 wraps of that, and we'll cut off our 3/0. Now this tying thread could be any color. You could use scarlet if you wanted to, or bright yellow. It doesn't really matter, as all of that is going to be covered up by the tying materials. So at this point I tie in my olive 70 denier tying thread from Togen's. That's a fantastic thread. I want something slender for the rest of the materials in here, and so we go in with that. And I've kind of botched that a little bit here, so let's try that again, trying to show you the label there. And I went and tangled myself up, and we're wiggling the fly back and forth on the base too. I hope that's still in focus. I believe it is. Here we go, and we'll cinch that toward the back of the hook, wrap that in to about opposite the barb. At this point we're tying in a thin copper wire. I'll leave that tag in fairly long, it's just easier to do. 2 loose wraps, pull back on it a little bit. Don't have to worry about it getting all the way back, because the materials again are going to cover up that tag end. There we go, let that bobbin hang. And here we go in with our olive marabou. And I take off about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of that along the shank of the feather here, which we're going to use as our tail. And take that and we kind of roll it and fold it at the base here to try to bunch that marabou up. Now I'm going to measure that against the hook, and I want that tail to go about half the length of the hook, maybe 3/4, and we'll butt tie that in at the tail there. Move it to the back, a couple of loose wraps to cinch it in place and secure it down. Then we're going to bring that thread forward of our feathers up to the halfway point where we left our black thread. At this point, I moisten my fingers, especially because the weather's quite dry here on the island right now, and I twist the marabou into a rope. And that will create a nice rope for me to represent the abdomen, the slender abdomen. And we'll bring that just about halfway, about 3 or so wraps up here, not too many. We'll tie that off. 2 wraps behind, 1 in front to cinch that in place, cut off the tag end. Here we'll take the copper wire we tied in earlier and wrap it to provide the segmentation. We'll just spiral it forward about 3 or 4 or 5 wraps. 2, 3, 4, and bring it up. And that provides that segmentation, which is a significant feature, I think, on the Damselfly. And we'll take my dedicated scissors for wire, cut those off. And here's the namesake of the fly, the Straggle string from Togans in pale olive. You could go with dark olive, you could go with tan, even gray. The Damselflies in any given piece of water will have some variation, a variety of their colors. And so getting exact representation based on a single sample is probably not, you don't have to be too concerned about that. And here we'll wrap the Straggle string forward. I've seen Damselflies that vary in color in a single piece of water from yellow to pale olive to dark olive to tan to dark green. And if your fly represents the shape and movement of the natural, then color is the least important feature. So play around with colors. So we've got that nice tapered body in there. The Straggle string adds to the width of the front. It also adds to the illusion, I believe, of the movement of legs. And here I'm using, for a set of legs, mallard flank dyed in yellow. Now I'm going to strip off about 8 fibers of that from one side of the feather, and I'll bring that to one side of the hook and tie it in on the far side. Put 1 loose wrap, position that a little bit. I don't want them going into the tail, but I want them fairly long and prominent. There we go. We'll give that a couple of tight wraps and cut off the tag end. And we'll do the same on the near side of the hook. About 6 or 8 fibers brought in on the near side. Give it 1 loose wrap. Position it if necessary and tighten up. Cut off the tag end. Now I'm going to bring my thread forward to the bead chain and behind the eye to secure that and build up a nice conical head there, just to finish off the fly. I'll give that thread just a touch of brushable super glue to cement that head in place. And then our whip finish tool will finish off this fly. There we go. Give it a few wraps. There. 3, 4. Now, the way to fish this fly, there are a couple of great ways to fish this fly effectively. One is to troll it, but I would highly recommend trolling it with your oars rather than a motor. Oars lend a different movement to the fly in the water. If you can imagine what you're doing with your oars, you're pulling on them and then relaxing as you reach forward. So you've got this natural pull and drift pause, which lends some very lifelike movement to your fly in the water. Do that along the drop-offs, over shoals, sunken islands. Make sure you have your rod in a rod holder. I have seen rods ripped right out of the stern of the boat by this strikes on this fly. The other way is to anchor in the shallows right up against the reeds. You might be in 2 feet of water or less. Then cast out over the drop off into the deep water and strip in with 4 to 6 inch strip retrieve. Again, hold on tight. The strikes are vicious. You're going to enjoy this fly. Late spring, early summer, damselfly hatch. This is a great match for them. Good luck out there.